Hey Crossroads, Pastor Luke here. We are in the midst of our Bible study. We're looking at the nation of Israel and especially some of the leaders. If you've missed any of the past weeks, they're available on YouTube. I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to like, subscribe, share, put a comment, anything like that. Currently, we are in the book of Judges. We actually touched on it a little bit last week, but I wanted to spend just a few more minutes in Judges. It's kind of that weird length. I didn't want to breeze through the whole thing, but I don't want to look at every single judge. We ended on this slide. This is Israel, the entire geography, and you can see it's broken up by the tribe, so what area each tribe took. And then over here, the list by tribe shows which judge came from that tribe. So quick recap, the judges were over a long period of time. They come from different regions, and they typically have more of a regional authority. It's most of them don't kind of pass that authority down to each other, but they have a purpose. They have a specific thing they're doing. Got a lot of cool graphics for you this week. If we look at the cycle of sin found in the book of Judges, we actually see several different times that it says that the nation of Israel got themselves into trouble. So the big cycle goes like this. Israel serves the Lord. They're in good relationship with God. Israel falls into some kind of sin and idolatry. It is typically because of the people who are still living in the promised land who they have begun to intermingle with. Israel then becomes enslaved. There is a different group that's oppressing them, and I'll show you a slide in a minute that shows which ones they are. Israel then cries out to the Lord for help. God raises up a judge. And the judge is specifically there to deal with their internal issues, but it's really there to deal with this enslavement and this oppression from a local tribe group. And of course, Israel is delivered because that judge is successful, and Israel is back to serving the Lord. And they repeat this cycle numerous times. What happens, chapter 2, verse 19 gives kind of a key understanding. But when the judge died, the people returned to ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors, following other gods and serving and worshiping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. Early verse in Judges, but really kind of encapsulates the whole cycle. And what happens is, as they go around, it actually gets worse and worse each time. Judges is really a cautionary tale. Everything in Judges is really about how things are not as good as they were before, or they're not as good as they're supposed to be, how the people are missing the mark, how they're struggling, and how they are actually spiraling, not just circling, but spiraling away from God. Israel serves the Lord, sin and idolatry, enslavement, cries out for help, judge, and Israel is delivered. And in fact, a lot of the judges aren't really great at what they do. All right, so let's look at the judges real quick. We have multiple judges, but some of them have a more significant story, more significant stuff said about them, and some of them are actually pretty quick. Shamgar literally has a single verse. Check out Shamgar's verse. After Ehud came Shamgar, son of Anath, who struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad. He too saved Israel. That is this guy's whole story. That's Shamgar. That's all we get about him in the whole entirety. But interestingly enough, the longer the story is of a judge, the more troubles and issues are highlighted in that judge's life. To the point where we'll look at Samson in a minute. Samson is pretty much tied for being the judge who has the most written about him, and he is the worst. Ironically, he's the most popular and famous, but he is also the worst. So what we have sometimes are, we have these enemies that they're dealing with, right? There's 6 different groups, and so the judges get kind of grouped together, like Gideon, Tola, and Jer are put together because they're all dealing with the Midianites. Obviously, to cover absolutely everything, you'd have to read through the book and check it out and post some questions down below. But this is the high-level view. We see what their text is, and you can see Samson has 4 full chapters where, again, Shamgar had 1 verse, and Othniel, who is a longer judge, he deals with the entire issue of the Mesopotamians, he's only got 4 verses. So the more we hear about a judge, it typically tends to make them look worse. It tends to highlight their failings and their faults and their troubles. And what we see then is, then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. The cycle begins with a statement to the effect that Israel did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And you could see it numerous times here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can see it 6 different times appear. By the way, borrowed these slides, but don't they look awesome? You can see again and again, Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. And as I said, it's continuing to spiral. So let's take just a quick minute and we will look at Samson. This is going to be a quicker one today. Samson, was probably this classic Bible story. It's like a David and Goliath. He's got a Hercules feel to him. He's a big, infinitely strong kind of guy. And so it's, oh wow, what a great judge. He's so powerful. We would easily look to Samson and his ability and think, oh, he does a great job. He's good at what he does because he is powerful. And when he gets into an encounter, into an issue, a fight with the Philistines, he does very well against them. But really, his entire story is broken down like this. He sees a pretty Philistine woman and says to his parents, I would like to marry this woman. Go arrange this. He is not supposed to intermarry with the Philistines. They get as far as engagement parties and all this stuff, and he tries to trick them, and he tries to trick the Philistines, she tricks him. It's a whole deal. The engagement gets called off, and that woman marries the person who was his best man. Then Samson wants vengeance on the Philistines. Really, the first time that Samson looks to fight the Philistines is his own anger for a situation that went bad that he never should have been in. And as part of that vengeance, he goes and in the bet, he kills some people and steals some stuff. In the vengeance, he lights some fields on fire. And then the book just says sometime later, a while later. The Bible likes to use sometime later, which is a very inspecific term in my thinking, but a while later. He basically goes back onto a similar thing, and almost all of Samson's interactions in the entire book have to do with him looking for ladies. So he eventually has another trip to one of the Philistine cities, who gets caught again as he's looking for love in all the wrong places, fights him again, and then sees Delilah again, third time, Philistine ladies, again, same cycle. And this is the time, sometimes these kind of get mushed together, like in the mind of Sunday school. Sometimes when I think back, I think like, oh, it's all one story, but it's actually 3 different segments. So Delilah is the one, you might have heard the story, where she says, how are you so strong? What is the source of your strength? And he lies to her several times. He says, oh, it's this and it's not. And every time he's still strong. And she continues to ask him. And even though she basically tries to trap him 2 different times, on the 3rd time, he finally tells her the truth. He loses all his strength. He's bound. His eyes are gouged out. And the very last thing he did, and the most significant thing that he does, is that he pushes over the support pillars of the temple that he is chained in and that the other Philistines are in. And like the last verse of Samson's story says that he did more to fight the Philistines in death than he did in life. That all the time that he judged Israel, if we go back and look at this slide, it says that he judged Israel for 20 years. In all that time, it was his, I don't want to call it suicide, but it was his final act that also cost his life that was most significant. He wasn't really interested in Israel, in serving. He wasn't interested in following God. He was self-serving. And it brings up a whole lot of interesting questions. One in my mind that is probably amongst the most significant is, why is God using people who surely to me seem so flawed? Samson, again, most of all, incredibly flawed. We can only take what we have in the text, and none of these stories make him look like a bright, shining hero when you really look at him. I'm going to give you A couple thoughts before we wrap up. One, well, we don't know who Samson is fully. Now, it's on the one hand, we have to read the text. On the other hand, God knows the heart. God looks at the heart. And so I want to hold out hope that there are redeeming values and redeeming characteristics of Samson that we don't know about. Just like we would want someone looking at us who might see our worst areas, who might maybe get the story from someone who doesn't like us, from someone we've had a bad past relationship with, we would want someone to think, there's probably more to this person than just that. But second, and more significantly, is God is working. And he uses people all the time. He gives us opportunities constantly to get lined up with what he is doing. So while Samson does a terrible job of aligning himself with God in the stories that we have, there are these moments, especially at the very, very end, where we have like a repentant story. That he's trying to turn back to God. He's trying to make things right. And he's trying to get himself back lined up with what God is doing. The difficulties come when Samson has gone so far off course that now, even though he's kind of reoriented himself, he's way away from where he's supposed to be. And so had Samson made better choices, he probably would not have found himself inside that temple as it was collapsing down. But because of the choices, and God still calling him back, God still trying to give him opportunity to get right, Samson has better options, but possibly not great options. God is still calling him, still wanting to use him, and Samson has to really go with what is best. So for us in our personal life, listen, we can get ourselves off course. We can do things that can't be undone. We can make mistakes that can be forgiven, but can't be erased, cannot be removed. God still wants to use us and to position us, but now sometimes because of where we have put ourselves, there's more pain and difficulty and hardship to realign and start going in the direction that God is moving. Let me close in prayer. Lord Jesus, you know who we are and where we are at. God, you know our direction. I know that you have plans and purposes for us. And God, you know where we've made mistakes, where we have slipped up. Lord, I pray that we would still be sensitive to your Spirit, that we would still be following after you and striving for you. God, help us to get ourselves aligned with what you're doing. Lord, I pray that you would help us to recognize our mistakes and to ask your forgiveness. We know that you will do it, and help us now to begin to get back in touch with you, in line with you. Lord, I pray your blessing on every person today. Jesus, I pray that you would be with them and use them. In your name, amen. God bless Crossroads. We'll see you soon.